Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicle Stories of the Supernatural. And today I have a fantastic lady to interview. Her name is Tui Snyder. And she's an author. She's written several books, including the one that I've just died to talk to her about, which is Cemetery Symbols. Because as you could tell from some of my shows, I go on what they call cemetery runs, which is I go through all these different cemeteries, from the ones in the major cities to those little rural cemeteries that popped up, especially here in Central Florida after the Civil War. And as a matter of fact, I was discussing with her before we started rolling that so many times, I see symbols, especially on these old, the ones that actually, would write stuff, especially the poor cemeteries. And I was like, I know this means something, but I just don't know what it is. So let's get going. How are you doing, Tui? How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm really excited. Glad technology's cooperating.
Oh, yeah. Believe me. I did a whole show on that, on paranormal sabotage, where one time it seemed like, after I had checked all my stuff and my connections and my camera and my audio, everything went south. So I know. I call it paranormal sabotage, but I know that sometimes we're at the mercy of electronics and computers and stuff like that. If they don't want to cooperate, we're out of luck. But anyway, I know you're an author. You've done several books about the paranormal.
Yes, I'll do show and tell. I brought them all here.
Well, no, as a matter of fact, I'm going to put a link, but I do have a slide with all your last 4 books, on there, and of course a link to about your books. But the one, you did one for Paranormal Texas.
Companion workbooks. I'll get into these too.
Yes, I saw that. I saw those.
And I've got this one. This is so
right.
Fun.
That was the Ghost Hunters workbook, and what was the other one?
The Graveyard Journal.
The Graveyard. I was looking at that. I was like, oh my God, what is that?
I'm filling mine up. It's fun because anyway, we can talk about it later.
Yes.
Getting ahead of myself. I'm just excited.
So, I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody. How did you get involved with the paranormal? Was it something that happened to you as a kid? Was it an adult? What happened?
Oh, it was definitely something that happened to me as a kid. And I pondered all the time. I am the youngest of 3 kids by quite a gap. There's like 7 years and 10 years.
Wow.
And when you're the youngest, you kind of know when you say there's something went bump in the night, it gets... People are like, oh, yeah, honey, you and your big imagination. And I admit it, I have a big imagination, right? I get that part. But starting from about age 10 or 11, we lived in this one house. And this continued the whole time I lived there.
Okay.
But it would just be randomly. Now, it would happen. And so this is why I have a pet peeve, too, where people think that the paranormal only happens at 3 a.m. or something.
Oh,
or maybe
sure.
Midnight.
Yes.
No.
You could go on
about
that.
When you're 11, yes. There's a little pet peeve of mine. Okay, so when you're like 11 years old, your family doesn't leave you alone at 3 at night, But what would happen is maybe they'd all go grocery shopping or somewhere. They'd all be doing something. I'd be home alone. I remember the first time I was playing with my hamsters and my train set. I had a really cool train set, trying to get my hamsters to ride the train. They weren't into it. I was like, oh, well, whatever. When I hear, how when you're little and you're told not to jump on the bed?
Yes.
So, of course, when they're gone, you jump on the bed. Well, we had this guest room. It wasn't anybody's official bedroom. It was just that grandma came or a guest came.
Right.
It was downstairs, kind of below my bedroom in a room over. Well, I knew exactly what it sounded like when someone was jumping on that bed. So I'm sitting there going, come on, I want you to, Houdini was the name of my hamster. I want you to ride the train. And all of a sudden I hear, bounce, 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 bounce. Someone is bouncing on that bed. And I know I am home alone. So I was terrified that first time. It went on for maybe 10 minutes, which seems like forever. I was terrified, stayed in. I told everybody. They come home. They search the house. Nothing. So they just, oh, honey, you and your big imagination. Well, I kind of forgot about it, as you do. And what do you know? Maybe 3 months later, or I don't know how long it was, it happened again. And I mentioned it again. Finally, I quit mentioning it. But every few months, when I was home alone, sometimes it happened like at 7 p.m. So this bouncing would happen. Finally, after I don't know how many months, I decided I've got to confront this thing. And the thing about it was, it sent me, the good part about this was, because I couldn't explain it, no one believed me, I went to the library. There was no internet then, so I couldn't Google this. So we lived in a university town, and there were all sorts of libraries I could go to. I went to mostly the public library, and I asked about this. The librarian was wonderful. She pointed me to the ghost section, and I started going into the adult section at that age and finding all these books on metaphysics, Edgar Cayce, reincarnation. And because I couldn't explain this, it turned me on to this whole, what, you mean adults do believe this? There are some adults who do believe this and actually research this? And I started doing yoga, which is silly it's good, but when you're 11, you're like a pretzel. I mean,
it's like,
everything.
Yeah.
Easy, I'll put my head behind it. Why is this so hard? Oh, no, only I could be like that now. So I'm really grateful to this. At the time, I was so mad because I didn't want to look dumb in front of everyone else that seems so smart. I mean, they are. They're older than me and so much more capable. But this went on and on. So finally, I decided to confront the ghost. I decided, well, maybe it's some sort of poltergeist from reading.
Right.
It was noisy ghost, which fit. And so I was taking notes on this stuff. It really got me into it. And I go run it down. I put an Afghan over my shoulders, and I had the cat in one arm and a pool cue in the other arm. And I thought that was going to keep me safe. And
Love it.
Something. I go running downstairs. I'm standing out in front of the door, and I'm going, "What are you?" And I can still hear it, something. So I kick the door open. Luckily, it wasn't shut all the way. And it stops. And the cat goes, "Rear."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. And I flicked the light on. And I run around and put my hands around because I'd heard that it could, by that time I'd read that paranormal activity could cause cold spots, but it was undetermined. It was, it was a basement, so it was kind of, I don't know. But the long and short of it is, it showed me, that recurring incident showed me that there's more to the world than the five senses and everything.
Oh, sure.
And it got me, I connected with another girl, and she and I don't know why she believed me, but she believed me, and we would start trading books on that, Edgar Cayce and all these other things, and reading whatever Rosicrucians, anything we could find out, mysterious stuff, trying to find an answer. And finally, one day when we were about 15 or 16, I think, we were doing homework at my house, and everybody was gone, and it happened. Something happened, and I was so happy finally someone was there with me. So we went running. I was just like, "Yay, come on down." She was all scared. I'm like, "Yay, isn't that great? There's nobody in there. Come on."
Yeah, because by now you were like, "I can handle this."
Yeah, but I was just happy that someone else was hearing it. I forgot to be scared. I was like vindicated. Like, yay, another living person heard it. So, and I do have a funny connection. Years later, my stepdaughter, when she was little, we lived out on this little tiny island, and there was a population of 7 out there. And that we were caretakers for some people. That's why we got to live out there. And she told me that when she would walk down on the beach and around the corner to this one cove, she would hear Indian drumming, like Native American, but not very often. And our island was known, there were no Native Americans living there now, but it was a special island to them. They would come over and cut the cedars down there to make their canoes, because it was kind of, back in the day. And, but my first impulse was, I'm sure she's just hearing boat hulls slapping on the water.
Right.
But I remembered how I felt, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me next time it happens. And I thought, I didn't want her to feel like I did, that frustration. Yeah. I wanted her to know she was believed. And my friend from childhood, who'd heard the something in my house, came to visit us out on the island.
Oh, really?
And I kind of forgot about what my stepdaughter had said. She and I are catching up. We're walking along by the water's edge, and all of a sudden she's like, "Do you hear that?" I'm like, yeah, it sounds like drumming. And we heard this, that kind of doom, 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 doom. And I was like, oh, well, maybe someone must come visit the island around the corner. They're having a drumming circle. So we walk around the corner, and to that very same cove, we walk up, and we get right to the spot where suddenly my stepdaughter's story comes into my head. She said, "And Mom, as soon as I get to their bottom step, it stops." And I'm like, the sound stopped.
Okay.
I got chills, and I'm like, holy moly. And we ran up and looked all around, nothing. And I was so excited. It was kind of interesting that it was the same girl who had, now she's a woman, who had heard that with me as a kid, And so
right. And let me ask you something. Afterwards, when you all grew up, Because I know sometimes I've heard of families that while it's going on, they kind of do exactly what you say. Everybody's like, no, no. And then later on, when everybody grows up or sometimes moves away, they kind of fess up that they had their own experiences.
Yes.
Okay.
There was one or two things. I need to mine this a little bit more. But apparently there was something going on. My dad would hear something in our house. He would hear someone knocking down on the basement, like the back door. Because it had like a little mother-in-law apartment kind of thing. And when my older sister was in college, she lived there. And so she'd go out on dates and, and come home late at night. And he thought maybe she'd forgotten her key. So he'd hear knocking. And he'd go down and check the door. Nothing would be there. He'd go upstairs, and like 10 minutes later, she'd come home. And he thought it was a weird coincidence. So I learned this years later. I'm like, well, thanks, I need to ask them all, like at Christmas, like, come on, fess up, people. What else, But at the time, I thought I was the only one.
And it makes you think that the thing on jumping on the bed, you think of a little kid, like
maybe.
That's usually who gets a thrill out of getting on the bed and jumping on it.
I know it was a thrill to me. It certainly got my attention. I sometimes wonder, maybe the whole purpose of it was just to get me questioning things. I mean, maybe it's some aspect of myself from the future, or maybe, I get really out there in my thoughts. I'm like, maybe it was just something to keep my mind open. It definitely kept my mind open, and it made me nicer to people who say they have something weird, because I'm like, I kind of respect what they're experiencing, because, it made me less judgmental.
It gives you a little bit of empathy and say, you know what, I know what it's like not to be believed or to be poo-pooed.
Oh, do I?
Just because I'm a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I'm always respectful, because I think little kids I look back, I had a lot of experiences as a little kid where I'd hear things, or I would just know things that I wasn't supposed to know sometimes, and I didn't know how I knew them, so I would try to find a reason to know. Yes. How did I know that I can't think of a good example right now, but just a little, so I think, Oh,
yeah, I think we all have, I remember when I kind of did something, I didn't have, because of an experience, but I was one of those library geeks, even when I was a kid.
Me too.
But back then, the only thing they had was like Hans Holzer. They didn't have like all the books that they got now.
I know, now it's like, wow, and then there's Google, and there's shows like yours, and, wow.
There's a million things, and he was like the only one out there that was really putting out books, but most of the stuff took place up in those properties up in the Northeast U.S., and but that was my introduction to it. And I remember it was I didn't have an experience that I really think about it till I was like in my teens, and I didn't realize what it was until later on, because when you're a teenager, you pay attention to everything but that.
Yeah.
So what happened? Fast forward, how did you, I mean, obviously you have that interest, and that's the point I was trying to make. I know what it's like when you, as a kid, you have that interest in it, and it still keeps going with you as you become older.
Oh, it does.
And then, of course, during the 80s and 90s and everything, more and more authors started coming out with either metaphysical books, things of that nature. Even though I'll tell you, I think what put me off for it for a while was back when the first time I saw The Exorcist, which I went without my mother's permission.
Oh no!
Oh my God! Oh, and it took me.
I'm glad I didn't see that for a long time.
No, my mom had told me you can't go to see that. I've heard that movie, because it was making all the papers, and I have an uncle who was much younger, like you said, like a 20-year difference, and him and his wife are going to go see it. And they said, "You want to go?" I said, "Yeah." And I tell my mom, "Oh, I'm going to go with Uncle." And she goes, "What are you guys going to go see?" And I said, "Oh, The Day of the Dolphin had just come out." I said, "Oh, we're going to go see that movie." I lied.
Yeah.
But then it caught up with me because, of course, I saw about the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then the rest of the time I was freaked out. I couldn't even look at the screen. I made my uncle walk me to the door. So that night, I go and I sleep with my mom, but I not only sleep with her, I'm like on top of her. She's like, "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?" And I'm like, I had to fess up. I started crying. I went to see that movie. I told you not to go.
My older sister did something like that with me. She took me to some horror movie. I don't know the name of it to this day, but it was, we lived in a college town, so they'd have classic movies come through that you could go see. So she thought I was going to see Gone with the Wind. But I actually go to see, Bloodbath City 4.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And so after that, they're like, after that, I'd ask to go to a movie. They'd be like, I don't know, you had nightmares after Gone with the Wind, so this one might be.
And you're like,
everything was
well,
going to be too
okay.
scary for me. I'm like, okay, I can't fess up and explain what I really saw.
Because if not, that's it. I couldn't because I was, like I said, not only did I sleep with my mom, I was like almost hugging her. And she's trying to sleep, and you can tell she's like, "What's wrong with you?" You know,
what is
like
that? Yes.
So yeah, I had to confess, and but yeah, that was the only detour that I think that I took from the paranormal, and then I got over it, and I realized, you know. But yeah, so here you are, you become an adult, and did you keep on having experiences, or what happened?
Yes, I did. I think I've just always been open to it, and the one thing that this is one of my little soapbox issues, and it's why I created, I'll just show you, how I made that, the Ghost Hunters Journal.
Yes.
And this is a recent thing I made, but, and even while we're talking today, I have a little notebook on me. I've kept a journal for years, for decades,
Okay.
But the thing about it is, here's what I think, and I notice this a lot now, because there is, since, I don't know, the late 90s or something, all those ghost shows came out where people go on ghost hunts. And I think that's great, and I'm glad that people are I like it when they take kind of a scientific approach to things, and try to, it's kind of hard to, one of the things about you can't really replicate, ghosts are circus animals, but just to take an approach where you are writing down what you experienced. You don't just go, here's my thing. It's great to go on a ghost hunt. It's great to go on a paranormal activity and stuff. But you need to take time afterwards to reflect, digest your experience, write it down right away while it's fresh, and then and that's part of that you're going to get way more out of it if you do that, if you write it down. And the reason is, like, things that I was on a ghost hunt a couple of months ago, and if I hadn't gone through and just listened to all the audio I just had a tape recorder running, and I listened to 10 minutes of it every day, because it gets pretty tedious to sit there with the 4 hours of, but I would just listen to 10 minutes, and, it kind of made it like, you brush and floss your teeth, you listen to 10 minutes of audio, and just to see, and what was interesting because of that, that's how I ended up discovering this doppelganger thing that had happened.
Wow.
I would not have noticed I overheard at the start of the night, because while we were still setting up equipment, I was with an actual, teams that do it, and they were setting up their equipment, and I was staying out of the way.
Okay.
and my first audio, I had audio going, they had audio going, and one of them, mine, you don't hear anything. You hear me talking. I say, I just wonder if anybody's up here with me. But then you hear my voice singing afterwards on the tape recorder next to me. So there's 2 different tape recordings of the same exact moment.
Wow.
All right, so fast forward to later that night, you can hear another person on the thing going, "Hey, Tui, where are you?" I'm like, "I'm right here." Because I was just to the right of him. He goes, "Wow, I just saw you. I can swear, you were just over here. It looks exactly like you. I was wearing a hat and everything, yada, yada." Well, see, if I hadn't gone through all my audio and listened to it, and then written down the things that happened, I would have missed that. So getting back to what my soapbox is, I see a lot of people, I have friends, they'll just go every weekend, they're going to another haunted hotel or a haunted this or that. Sometimes they come back and they say, "Oh, nothing happened. It wasn't." Well, did you listen back to your audio? Because just because you did not observe it doesn't mean nothing happened. You just didn't notice it. It's like you go out walking in the jungle and you think there aren't any animals there. Do you know how many animals saw you walk through the jungle? You were like on their radar, just because you're like, we're fairly unobservant humans. So we have to hone our own observational skills. We have to take the time to digest these experiences we do, and you will see. But it's not like if you watch just on TV. Of course, they cut out all the boring parts because it's a TV show, and they got to realize
sometimes nothing happens.
Yeah,
or apparently nothing happens.
Yeah, apparently nothing happens. And then if you don't take the time, which might seem tedious to you, but you can make it so it's not. Like I said, I just listen to. I don't bore myself to death on this. It takes me a while to go through everything, but I go through like 10 or 15 minutes so I can actually pay some attention to it. That's when you find stuff. It's like panning for gold. You don't just go up and look at a river and go, "There's no gold in there."
Yes.
You have to have spent the time. So I think what I'm really trying to encourage people is to write down their experiences. And this, I'm like, did things still happen to me? Yeah, but the thing about it is I started to notice that I would remember the things that happened to me. But, and has this ever happened to you? I was working in a dental office, and I mean, not that, have you ever worked in a dental office?
I know what you mean.
Okay. Yes, have you? Oh, wow. Okay, no, I was working in a dental office, and it was in one of those ones where it was an old house that they had the dental office in. And I had weird things happen to me in the basement a few times there. I don't know what it is about basements and being haunted, but that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole different thing. We could go off on that, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. That's a funny trail. I know I get all excited to go off on it. Okay, but my point here is that my coworker and I were upstairs, and I had to do a bunch of stuff on the computer. She was one room over. She had to do some filing or something, and we were not in each other's, earshot of each other. And I'm really concentrating on what I'm doing. We'd closed for the night. It was all locked up, and we had about 2 hours of work to do. So I'm just, I want to get this done. I want to get home. All of a sudden, I hear someone just go, Tui, like right in my ear, like my name,
Okay.
Just, and it sounded like a man, but I'm like, is that my coworker? Who was a girl? I'm like, is that? So I go over to, and I'm like, Christine or whatever. I go into her room, and her eyes are huge. Right when I walk in, she goes, did you just call me? And I'm like, no. And we compared notes. She goes, you sounded like a man. It was right in my ear. I'm like, okay, this is freaky, but let's just keep going. We want to get out of here. Well, it happened to us like 3 or 4 times more that evening, and we were just totally jumpy by the time we left the office. So that's all we could talk about. I rode home with her. That's all we could talk about, the whole car ride home. And then we talked about it like once more. And then maybe 3 months later, I brought it up. I think we were at lunch. They go, oh, kind of like that weird whisper breathy voice we were hearing that one night. And she's like, what's breathy man's voice? She just didn't have any memory of it. Right. And I think it's because she didn't, I went home and I wrote about it in my journal. So actually, she didn't remember it so much so that it actually made me question my own sanity. So I thought, what? So I ran home and I kind of paused through my journal. Sure enough, I'd written it up and a lot of detail. I'm like, okay, not, crazy some ways, but that's not my insanity moment. And it made me think, if people aren't, I think if people, I call it the weird box. Like if you don't have a place in your brain to store unusual memories or unusual things, you just forget them. It
gets run over by the daily stuff.
The normal.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll just go ahead and remember all the normal stuff. I don't know where to put this memory, Chuck. Those are the memories I try to keep. And I think people like you and me and people who are interested in this, we need to cultivate that. Even I will forget things if I haven't written them down. So that's why I decided to make a separate journal just for my kind of woo-woo things and just to see, because if we all do this, you know how like MUFON, the people who research UFOs, they have databases and they have, if something happens, if I saw a UFO right now, I would call MUFON. But if I had something happen right now, who do I report that to? How does it get put into a database?
Exactly.
If we start making some sort of paranormal database, maybe we could go, we could discover that. Did you know every March paranormal activity spikes?
Yes.
Why is that?
What was going on?
Some data. Yeah, so that's a big thing I'm passionate about.
Well, no, and you're absolutely right. MUFON, because of course their visibility, they have ways for people just to, and they do have a bunch of cases, and they can look at it and say, okay, we got a cluster, or in this area we got a bunch of calls of people calling in. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks they had a sighting over there off the coast of Oregon. It wasn't, it was a UFO in the sense of that it was a plane that they were saying didn't have a transponder. None of the stuff that usually airplanes have. Yeah. That usually, either where who or what it is and where it's going. It didn't have any of the above. They scrambled some F-15s off to go, like, where is it? And then
I was going to say, I thought the military's all over that.
And I can't remember, some of the radar stuff couldn't pick it up. Somebody had called it in because they had a visual, somebody on another plane, like a regular plane. When the F-15s go out there, they can't find it anywhere. And a bunch of stuff happened around that time around Oregon, like 2 weeks ago. And I know what you're saying as far as that people could say, well,
I'm writing down Oregon right now, so I remember Oregon UFO, so I can.
And it was like that's really weird. Like,
that is weird.
What's going on? And I mean, even some people that normally don't look at it from the UFO angle, we're looking at it. Okay, is there some type of threat? Is this some a plane from somewhere else that's able to invade our airspace, and then our F-15s can't find it and all this? And I was like, okay. That was really unusual. And a lot of people usually don't pay attention to those things. We're paying attention to it. But then at the same time, I looked at, and there was a bunch of other UFO sightings where I want to say it was around Oregon. It was like a cluster of like 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Where it just seemed there was a big spike in sightings of either
Oh, all
lights or
right.
things like that. And so I know it, but in the
Yeah.
sense of what you're saying, as far as a personal diary, I mean, I know there's things that I probably don't remember now, but I
Mhm.
know, especially when you go on these, whether it's a tour or a cemetery or anything, that I have found stuff after I've either looked at the tape or listened to
Yeah.
something. I've been like, one time I was doing one where it was an investigation, and I'm listening to the audio, and I heard a growl, and I was like, "What was
Ooh.
that?" You know, and that's
That's
so.
creepy.
I know that was like this. This is not anybody talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I ran it back like a million. But if you don't, but it's really short. If you're not paying attention, you just miss it.
That's
That was-
another reason I only do it for about 10 minutes or 10 to 15
Yes,
minutes.
because
I
now
want
you-
to have the stamina to pay attention and not glaze over, and maybe I'll miss, get that
Yes,
out.
you kind of like
Or something.
you lose the. And that thing about that you were saying about getting called. I remember one time I was going out to California. I was my son was stationed out there in the Navy, and I was driving a Jeep that he had bought, but he bought it in Florida anyway. I was driving out to California, so a friend of mine staying with me, we end up in North Florida, staying in this old house that had been turned into a bed and breakfast.
Oh.
But at one time, it had been like the town funeral home. Because, back then,
okay.
people lived
Sure.
and basically had a funeral home all wrapped up in one.
Yeah,
And,
a lot of
but that was
furniture
had been years
stores,
before.
They'd make coffins, and then they'd be the morgue at the same time. And then
Yeah, it was like one of those, So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, we were the only ones staying there, and they had left us the key, and the owner said, look, tomorrow in the morning, we're going to have a girl go in and cook breakfast for you. She'll be there around 9.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. It's 2-story, like an old Victorian. So I remember I was asleep. It was already morning, and when you're awake, but you're just lying in bed, like, okay, and I'm,
Oh, yeah.
when you're doing like this laundry list of things that I got to do when I get, and all of a sudden, I hear a man's voice call me, not scream or shout, but just call me and say, Marlene. Then I stand up in bed and I looked at the doorway of the room, like I just heard somebody call me.
Yeah.
My friend wasn't there, and I knew she was a smoker. And
So you think, yeah, she's not having a cigarette.
I was even, and first of all, her voice doesn't sound like a man's, but it was.
I know, but you try to make sense of it. You think, well, maybe
You know
she just
what?
had
When
a deep
you're
voice
in a
this morning. I
totally
don't know.
quiet house that there's no noise, and you hear that, it's not like, oh, there was somebody downstairs or the TV. There was nothing.
Yeah.
And I remember she comes back in like a couple of minutes, and I said, "Where were you?" She goes, "Oh, I was outside smoking." Because she was, real careful about smoking outside.
Yeah.
And I said, "Look what happened." And after that, I mean, I took a couple of pictures, but since we were passing through, and it was like this was not a dream. I wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay. I distinctly heard a man's voice call my name to the point that I sat up in bed thinking, "Who's in the house?" And there's nobody there because it came from like, when you can even know what direction it came from the doorway of the room.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Holy crap!" And it called my name of all things. It's like,
vague. Yeah.
But yeah, things like that. Sometimes you get lucky and things happen like that, but then other times it's much more subtle. Where, like what you're saying, that if you don't take notes, or something, you miss it.
Your story reminded me of one thing that kind of triggered me to start writing about haunted places. Was in this book I was writing about.
Yes, I saw that.
Unexpected Texas, and it's about quirky, offbeat, and overlooked places. But I've discovered that Texans can really tell a good ghost story. So as I would be. This was just supposed to be a road trip guide, but I would my husband and a guy, we'd go to small towns that are historic, and we'd go by the one of my favorite things is I look for the oldest person I could find a mom and pop diner and talk to some codger who's sitting there drinking coffee, or like the hardware store, the guy who's just leaning against the counter, not really buying stuff, and then I'd be like, so what don't people know about your town? They're like, oh well, they tell me some tip or another, and then they inevitably would go like, did you hear about the haunted bridge? Or something
they
like
know
that.
all the dirt about everything.
I know, and then yes, and so that's how I found out about this town, Jefferson, Texas. That is a really cool town. I love it. And Steven Spielberg is on record with having a paranormal experience at a hotel there. The hotel isn't particularly fond of it for some reason. I don't know why. They should be. It's a really great hotel, so I won't name the hotel. But you can find it out pretty easily online. And I do mention in my book, because he did say it. He said that hotel and the hotel, the Stanley up in Colorado, the Shining.
Right.
He said those were the 2 haunted hotels he's ever stayed in, but this was the first one, I think, because this was back in the 70s. He was like scouting locations for a movie.
Okay.
And it's a really historic town. I could see why they would scout this town. And he got home, or got to his hotel room kind of late at night. The whole crew is settling in. He kind of tosses his briefcase on a chair, and something, it bounces right back into his hand, as if it were thrown, But he thinks, I'm tired, maybe it just bounced. So he just puts it on the floor, just gets into bed and goes, whatever, I've had a long day. He doesn't think much of it. He's just pulling up the covers and drifting off to sleep when he hears, he opens his eyes, and there's a little boy standing by his bed who says, like, sir, are you ready for breakfast, sir? And that was it. He screamed, turned on the lights, gathered up his whole film crew, and they left the hotel at like 1 a.m. and went one town over and stayed at, I don't know, Budget Inn or whatever. But the next movie that he made after that was Poltergeist. So you got to wonder.
There you go. That's where he got his inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was like, you at a hotel. I guess because you were mentioning you were going to have breakfast in the morning. I thought, this reminds me of Steven Spielberg.
Well, you know what? It was with my same friend. I killed it. We since we were going out there, we were doing pit stops along. We stayed over at the Myrtles. Okay.
Oh,
and the Myrtles has.
I know so many people have. Oh,
same thing. We're the only ones staying at the Myrtles. Okay.
Oh.
So they tell us, same thing, because when you're gonna arrive a little bit late, they you call them and you tell them, look, I'm on the road, and they'll leave you a key and whatever.
Yeah.
So, and we're staying upstairs in what they call the judge's room, which is up the stairs, and right, we get there, and there's a courtyard out in the back, and again, my friend's smoking, and I'm sitting out there with her, and it's just as it's getting dark. And I'm sitting, they have, those little iron wrought, chairs and stuff out there. And I'm sitting out there and I'm like.
I love sitting out on a porch in those old southern.
And it was like, especially when you spent the whole day driving, you're like, okay, I'm ready to sit down and just like, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself.
Yourself.
Yeah, like, oh, okay, she's having her smoke and I'm like sitting there and I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I have the distinct feeling somebody's staring at me.
Ooh.
And the way the back of the house is, it has like that long portico that runs along on the inside.
Okay.
And it goes this way. When you go that way, it kind of recedes into shadows, even darker.
Oh.
And I remember turning around, and I'm like, I feel like somebody's looking at me. But, okay. Mm-hmm. So we went upstairs, and we take in all our things, and, it's a nice room, and well, let me tell you something. My friend wigged out so much. I was ready to throttle her. I don't know if it was because we were there alone. And again, when you're alone, everything, you hear every noise, every little.
Oh, yeah.
There's, what is it? Was it a Days Inn or Best West? Something that's about 2 or 3 miles down the road from there. We had to leave and stay over there. I was ready to kill her. And I was like, she just got so wigged out. She was like, and I was like, look, if there's something here, which there probably is, what's it going to do to us? I mean, what? We could get that scared out of us? Okay, so.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So we came back the next day. They were really pleasant, and we told them the story.
That's disappointing.
I know.
It is. I mean, because,
And I never had a chance. I wanted to go back and actually spend the night there because it was like, to me, it was great. It was like, oh, God, nobody's here. And I think that kind of played with her head a little bit, like, they're going to find us all the next.
The nice thing about nobody there is that if you hear a voice or something, you can't say it was just a guest in room across the way. I mean, it's really a great opportunity.
And you know what? They had that picture of the guy, the painting of the man that wherever you walk, he tracks you. So I see her looking at the picture, and I'm like, you know what? She's getting too wigged out with this. But it was a good experience. We still had fun, no matter what. We still had fun. We went back the next day and everything. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of these houses, they're great, but you also have to put like how can I say, you can't let your imagination run away with you, because then you're so scared that you don't enjoy it. You miss the part where you actually hear, or like And like I tell everybody, supernatural is not an on-demand thing, and a lot of times it's very subtle
Exactly.
what it
Hmm.
presents. And you made a
Hmm.
good point when you have a way to go back and go, hey, you know what? And then you start
Hmm.
thinking, wait a minute, was that what it was? And then you have a way of checking back and see, yeah, this
Yeah,
is
I like
what.
to compare it sometimes to bird watching
Mm-hmm.
because I have been when I first was researching my book Paranormal Texas on the show again. I'm having fun with this. Paranormal Texas. Oh, this is my travel guide to haunted places that you can actually visit in
Everybody, I'm the
Texas.
first one. You heard what I just said. That's how I plan my routes. Is like if I can
Hmm.
stop in on some place. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but if I can go in and stay at some place that's got some type of reputation, I'm there. I am there.
Yeah, so I didn't include places you can't visit because I hate reading about. Oh, this place sounds great,
Hmm.
a haunted hot dog stand. I'm going to go there, and then I read, oh, they burned it to the ground. No one can visit. It's like,
Right,
why don't you
exactly.
tell me about it? I actually did read about a haunted hot dog stand, and
Really.
I was so bummed. I'm not particularly into hot dogs, but I would have made a
Hmm.
exception to go to that one. But no, they didn't. So yeah, I mean, I went with a bunch of different paranormal teams, and
Okay.
some of them were so noisy and rambunctious. I mean, the level of professionalism really, that's what I learned. That really varies. So
Oh
there are a couple teams
yes.
that I love
Oh
that
yes.
are very, very professional and they have a way of
Yes.
doing it where they have like a center of command and they know
Hmm.
where everybody is at all times and you go in
Yes.
teams throughout and you never are like I don't
Hmm.
know where everybody is. So if I hear a big thump, maybe it was them. They keep
Right.
track of everything. So, but I've been on some that were so rambunctious. People were running around. They're drinking Jack Daniels,
And it's
and
like right, and
smoking
that's the
wacky
part.
tobacco. I'm like, why are you even here? I've been to slumber parties that were more,
Right, like forget
organized
it.
than this.
What's the use? What are you going to do an EVP? What are you going to do anything for? If all you're going to do is capture everybody around you.
Running. It's just a party, run amok in the
Yes.
dark where you're bumping into each other. And sometimes in Texas they turn off the air conditioning. So now running around sweating, people are, where is this? It's ridiculous because they're like, well, we don't want the AC sounds. Oh yeah, but get everybody else bumping around. So I mean,
Yes.
yes, I mean, I really believe that people have to
I've been in that scenario
approach it.
before because like I've been a freelance investigator like since the 90s, and I used to
Mm,
work with I still do, with a research foundation in Florida, and if something was down in South Florida, they would contact me, or if they were short on a member, on a
yeah.
body, in other words, they would call me to do it. So, and other times I would work with other groups, and I know exactly what you mean. There were some that were really professional,
Hmm.
and then there were others that it was like, you don't get out much, do you?
And then they complain, and then those groups, the thing I noticed too, the groups that are not organized and run around making all sorts of noise, then later on they complain, oh, that place isn't haunted. I'm like,
I was like,
really?
how
So
would
that's
you?
why I compare it to bird watching. I'm like, it's like we all went to a nature preserve together, and you were
Hmm.
running around, with an air horn, and you're like, there aren't any birds here. I'm like,
Exactly.
nobody
Yeah.
wants to be
Yeah. Unless
around
they're
you guys.
deaf,
I
but
mean,
yeah.
birds or people or ghosts or whatever. I mean, and they're not circus
Yes.
animals. It's just, no, you
And you
missing
know
the
what?
point.
I've talked to a lot of paranormal groups that's one of the things that we come up with, and I've said it on some of my shows. If you're a potential person that's looking for a group to join, you know what? First thing, look for somebody who's been around for a while. Okay, because in my
Yeah,
experience, a lot of them they dissolve within the first couple of years because
they
exactly of what you're
do.
talking about. Uh, look for somebody and and look at how professional they are. Do they have rules? Do they expect you to behave a certain way? I go, if you're really serious about it, this is the kind of group you should look for to join. Uh,
Yeah, good points.
or vice versa, or or if you're thinking of calling in a paranormal group, look at how long they've been together and look, do they have any standards when you speak to the person over the phone? How do they come across?
Hmm.
Just don't let
Yes.
anybody into your house for the sake of clearing up because you think you might have a paranormal or whatever going on. But I know so well what you mean.
Yeah, it was an eye opener.
Yes, yes, and but it is what it is. And like I
Yeah.
said, usually those groups, like maybe 1-2 years the most. After a while, they kind of like dissolve because, in truth, if you really do some investigation, sometimes they're really boring because
Hmm.
nothing really like pops out and
Yeah.
is in your face, and so you're just
Hmm.
there going a lot of times like, is that
I
running
know.
okay? The
So,
camera's running okay, good.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Should
yeah,
we
and a
go to
lot of people
bed?
after a couple of times they're like, oh, this is, like you just said, there's no ghost here, and then they kind of like then they don't show up for investigations and things like that. So I
Hmm.
love that like that you put that book that because like I said, I do that myself. If I can do a stopover in a haunted place, I love that. Um, And then, did you have other experiences yourself later on, whether someplace that you visited or you were living at?
Oh, gosh, I've had lots. And in fact, I've got, if you want to read about them, people can go to my website, tuisnyder.com, and I've got some on there. I've also got some in different anthologies that are put out by Teal Gray. There's one that just came out called Scared Senseless. And I talk about an experience I had with a painting that's kind of hard to explain. There's a lot that goes behind it. By the time we get to the point where the painting was being weird, there's a lot of backstory that explains it.
Okay.
And I had a coffee house for a couple of years, and I had some odd things happen there. And the nice thing about it was my customers would verify for me. So, like in that book I was just talking about, I had something. There were one before, Spirited Tales as well. This one, I have two stories that kind of dovetail. So I had my coffee house, and there was one week where it was like a neat coffee house. I had a little, bookshelf over here, and people would do this or that. I had a couch and all this. Anyway, this one corner was dark all of a sudden. And I thought, well, do I need to change the light bulb? Light bulb was fine, but I just bought another light bulb, same, brighter wattage, I think. I was trying to brighten it up. It was still dark over there. Well, there was a whole bunch of other stuff going on, which in retrospect, no wonder it was dark over there, but you have to read the story to get to it. But people would notice it. I had people who, totally didn't believe in, customers would come up and they go, God, what's the deal with the corner over there? It's dark. I think you need to change the light bulbs. Yeah, I just did. Oh, and all week long. So it's not just me thinking it's dark over there. Then I had some more like woo-woo people saying things to me. People, the lady from the metaphysical store coming down and going, honey, you got some lower vibrational. I don't want to scare you, but I think there's something lower vibrational in that corner you need to take care of. Oh, well, thanks for the latte. She walks out. I'm like, what does that mean? Because I'm in my 20s and I don't know, it's not a lot out there. The books I'd read didn't really explain how to cleanse. So finally a Native American lady comes in, and she leaves me a smudge stick, a sage smudge stick, and she's like, here, you really need this. We can talk later, because everyone grabs their coffee and they're going, but they're all over and over all week long. They're telling me something's going on in the corner. I kind of know something's going on in the corner, but I also have a business to run and a kid to raise, and things are nutty, so I'm like, trying to ignore it.
Life gets in the way, that kind of
does. And I'm like, that's the last thing. I got to pay my taxes. I got this or that. I got a health inspector coming. Dark corner. Who cares? Creepy feeling. Whatever. I'm just not wanting to pay attention to it. It escalates to the point where, and over and over, people from all walks. And
you know what? That's incredible. That just about, like you said, everybody, even whether they were metaphysically inclined or not, are noticing something about that corner.
Yes. Very, people who would roll their eyes at anything paranormal are saying, what's going on over there? What did you change over there? They're just mentioning. No, and I noticed too, no one's sitting over there all of a sudden, unless they're absolutely forced to. And then the people who are more sensitive or open to their sensitivity. I think everybody's sensitive, but the people who really are telling me it doesn't feel good over there. So it finally gets to the point where I'm there on my day off, and I'm doing my tax report thing, and I'm having, that was also my time. My own cup of coffee in peace, and then read a book for, and write my journal for a little bit and then go home. So I'm sitting there, but I'm not sitting in that corner either. And as then I thought, I'll write my journal. I'm writing my journal. And I got that feeling like someone's looking at me. And it was from that. And it was like not a happy feeling looking at me. It was not curiosity. It was like I felt anger over there. And I'm like, that is yucky. And I was getting more and more jumpy. And I finally, I'll kind of speed it up. I go into more detail in
don't worry
the
about
book.
that.
But, okay. Well, I get worried. I had this friend who was, at this point, I was sort of, I tried to approach things very skeptically, so I was not as open-minded, I guess, as I could have been. I just was like, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't feel like I had the time to deal with it. I didn't know what to make of it, but I just felt something over there. I remembered that smudge stick, and I thought, oh, yeah, I've got that in my corner. I don't know what you do with it. I don't even know how to use it or anything, but I had a friend who I figured would. And so I called her up, and she's like, oh, I'm so glad you called. I was thinking of you. I had a feeling. Or no, she called me. Yeah, the phone rings, and it was her. And I was so glad. She goes, how is everything? It's not good. I'm kind of, I guess I could tell you this. I'm freaking out. I'm about that. She goes, yeah, I had a feeling. So she and her boyfriend come over. They were an interesting pair. He was like a mechanic by day, and he looks totally normal, like nothing woo-woo, no, not like some dude with a ponytail or like a pierced ear. I mean, he's very straight, forward, just t-shirt. And she's just kind of comes from this, she's more woo-woo with like the braided hair, and, Celtic. She's the Wiccan pagan goddessy lady.
Yeah, he's like I'm the mechanic.
But they met each other, and they just fell in love, and it was the weirdest thing. So then I discovered from her that he has this incredible Reiki ability, where you know how people do Reiki, and
yes.
When he did Reiki on someone, I swear, if someone does not believe in Reiki, they needed to have him come and put their hands over their head. It felt like you could feel it. Everyone could feel it. It felt like mega tingling. He was just very low-key about it. He'd been raised in a very strict Christian family, but I've never felt anybody who had that much energy coming off their hands at will.
Right. Isn't that incredible?
Really? So anyway, they both came, and they were like, oh, yeah, we've noticed that corner for a while. We just didn't want to bother you. We knew you were going to go out this week, but I guess it's escalated. So they come over, and they teach me how to use a smudge stick. And they smudge the corner, and we go around, and they're saying things differently. And I was telling them, yeah, but this is this Native American, and here I'm this, little white girl. What am I? Am I culturally appropriating? They're like, all right, who gave this to you? I'm like, the Native American lady.
It's like, okay,
yeah.
she wants you to use it.
They're like, this is a tool. It's called a tool. Like, she said, you play the clarinet, right? Do you, or things that you do. I mean, you're not culturally appropriating wherever that came from, are you?
No, on the contrary. They kind of caught on that this works.
Yeah, they said, this is a tool. And so they got it all cleared, and I followed them around. And another thing that happened before they got there, this dish of forks just fell into the middle of my kitchen. I didn't see it happen, but that is what had me jumping out of my skin. And so that's what gets me. That is like the most simple thing in the world. Oh, some forks fell into the floor. You know what? When something simple and weird like that happens, it can make you so jumpy. So that's when, and then the phone rang, and I was just like, oh, the forks fell, the phone rang. I'm all like, oh, come and help me. So everything calmed down, and suddenly I noticed it was brighter in the coffee house. It finally brightened up. And I was like, great, thanks, guys. And they were like, oh, you're not off the hook, girl. You got to do this yourself every week because you get all sorts of energy. I'm like, what? No, hey, you guys come in and do that. No, grow up. You've got to clean your own space. I'm like, really? And so that was, I'd like to say that, ever since then, I was so good, and I always clean every spot so thoroughly. Once a week I smudge. No, this is one of those lessons I've had to learn over and over.
Yes.
Occasionally I will really slack off again, and I won't, clean a space. And like when my mother-in-law died, I helped clean out her house. In fact, because her sons were just all paralyzed with grief, so I handled all sorts of her stuff, bagged it all up. Now, some of her stuff included ancient Egyptian artifacts.
Really?
They had traveled the world.
Oh, wow.
A mummy's head, a 2,000-year-old mummy's head, which I didn't even want to touch.
Wow.
But so there's all sorts of stuff. So I handle all that. Well, we come home from New York after dealing with that, and I suddenly am sick. I kind of have this weird vague, I'm waking up with a cold sweats, and I have a mild fever, and I feel just, my neck kind of hurts, and I feel like I'm kind of, my posture's weird. Like, I'll just catch myself in this weird posture a lot. I mean, I wasn't quite like that. I'm overdoing it. I wasn't walking around.
Right, no, I know. But you're at some point, you kind of like, what's up?
Well, I was really dense. But my friend came to visit, and the minute she walked in the door, she's like, oh, hey, what's been going on? And I tell her, she's like, yeah, did you bring anything home from your mother-in-law's place? Oh, yeah, she gave me these tiki mugs, because I love tiki stuff, and this Irish tablecloth. She'd left them for me.
Right.
And she goes, yeah, that's not all you brought, honey. I'm like, what? She goes, and I'm like, what? She goes, how you feeling lately? I'm like, because she just picked up on it. My friend's very sensitive. She just picked up on it instantly. We cleansed, got rid of it, and suddenly I was like, oh, I feel like you just gave me a chiropractic adjustment. My temperature, I had a doctor's appointment scheduled because I was having those. I didn't have it to schedule it, so I was like, but I'd slacked off on the old,
and then you think
spiritual hygiene.
Who was the culprit? But like you said, you handled all the stuff from all over the world.
Told me, yeah, and I wanted to. I said, I want to know more about it, and she said, no, you don't engage, don't give it any energy. See, my curiosity is like, I want to know exactly if I've got a boogie. I want to know its name.
Right, exactly.
No, you don't, because then you give it more of your energy. Then you give it more entrance into your life. Then you give it permission to bug you. And I'm like, oh, well, I kind of sucks. It's kind of like the whole, in Harry Potter, Voldemort. You don't say his name.
I know.
Like
you know what? And then,
and like, I get it.
That's what a lot of people don't realize. I mean, because I'm the first one. I'm like you. I'm curious sometimes. Like, yeah. I want to know, what is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? Why? Or how? Or who? And I understand, though, that sometimes just letting it, like ignoring it, and it kind of like dissipates on its own, goes elsewhere, whatever the case might be. A lot less headache for you, because it's almost like once, I don't know if you ever read that series from Dean Koontz called Odd Thomas. And
no, I didn't.
The main guy, he's written like 5 or 6. He's psychic. He can see dead people. He sees Elvis. He sees Sinatra. But one of the things he can see is wherever there's going to be some type of major catastrophe with a lot of deaths, he sees these black. They're not shadow people, but they're blackish, like they're creatures. And one of the things he always says was, "I never let them know that I can see them."
Yeah.
Because once they're aware that I could see them, then it's like the jig is up.
It calls attention to yourself, I guess. Yeah.
Right. In other words, it's the same thing where sometimes you're just better off not engaging with it, because then what happens is they become aware of you, because like, oh, she's aware of me. She sees me, or she's trying to fuel the fire. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Your friend's instructions, like let it go. You can live without knowing about it.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I've got enough things that I can research. I love researching things. I'm like, okay, I will research other things. I won't as well,
exactly.
Concentrate on what you want to grow. So maybe I'll look up someone.
Sometimes like it was like curiosity. What was that? Curiosity killed the cat.
But satisfaction brought it back.
I know. Yeah, I can tell you. We are liking that. So how did you, when that book that you wrote about the cemetery symbols, which I think is, like I said, because of all the cemeteries, how did you decide to write that book?
Oh, yeah. So, a few things got me to write that. So here's the one, Understanding Cemetery Symbols.
Yes.
It's a pretty basic title, because I want people who are, these days you search up, I want to understand cemetery symbols. I want you to find my book. Because, so like I mentioned, I do love research and researching, and I do love cemeteries. I mean, I've loved them since I was a kid. I actually, when I was 9 years old, this creepy dude janitor tried to kidnap my friend and I. He locked us in a room, this and that, and we. Are
you serious?
I am.
Oh my God.
Yes, and we got away because anyway. Long story short, it was supposed to be a Girl Scout meeting that day. We didn't know it was canceled, so we showed up at the church, and no one was there. And this dude, he's all nice, and he leads us into this back room. And we suddenly realized we can't get out, that he is keeping us in. So we climb out. It was a bit of a jump for a 9-year-old still, but we made it out. And we were walking home. We were like, well, that was weird. Why did he lock us in that room? Why did he want to kill us? He pulls up in his car, and we managed to escape by running across the street into the graveyard. And we knew this graveyard so well because we played there a lot. So we knew exactly how to zigzag through it. And if we had zigzagged through it, and then we got to a path in the woods, and we got home, that led us out. And he wasn't able. But we could hear he was chasing it. Come back, girls, come back.
Oh, he went in there after you guys?
Yeah.
Oh, my
God. He went in his car.
I would have.
And then he got out of the car and started chasing us, and we were running. And luckily, we knew it so well, we weren't tripping or falling, because we had played tag, we played chase, we had all sorts of games, we played vampire, we had all these different games in there. That was one of our favorite places to play, because it just fired our imagination. And it was pretty. It was a historic grave. Yeah. Well, thank goodness, because if it had been a modern one that you could go over, he could have caught us. I don't know what would have happened. And our parents didn't believe us. So I want to visit that cemetery again. That's up in Virginia.
Let me ask you, did you tell your parents? They didn't believe you guys, or what happened?
They didn't believe us. Mm-mm. She and I, this one girl, I mean, we would get in trouble sometimes because she was a little bit more of a troublemaker than me.
Let me ask you something.
But yeah, they didn't believe us. Mm-mm. So nowadays, I think they would. But, I think there's more awareness now. But, whatever.
But that is, let me tell you something. That must have been this is like straight out of a horror film. You got the monster as in the real one chasing you. Holy crap.
It really, even to this day, I mean, I always wear shoes that I can run in. Like, I don't like to wear shoes that I don't think I could just take off running. I mean, now I'll wear shoes maybe a little, like, if I'm on a date with my husband, maybe not so running, but for years, I mean, I was like, forget it. I just was like, I want to be able to take off running if I need to. And when I sit in a restaurant or something, I like look to see where the escape routes are, I mean, because we had to escape. We had to use our wits, and the adults didn't believe us. So
let me tell you something. I would have
things as a kid.
I probably would have worn sneakers just about for everything.
I was so glad that we, had our wits about us to get away. To us, it was like, wow, I remember us saying, wow, that was like a Disney movie. We escaped from a bad guy. We were really impressed with ourselves.
Yeah, you know what? And it's like the innocence of a kid that you kind of like, sometimes even though you ran away from the danger, you kind of also underestimate or unaware of just...
Yeah, when I had a daughter of my own, my stepdaughter, I look back and I'm like, whoa, man,
yeah.
I would have gone over to that church and, read him the riot act, but for whatever
it makes you
reason,
wonder, had this guy done this before? Did he ever do
there.
it again? I take it you guys never went back over there again.
No, we moved away shortly after. It was like a lot going on in my family right about then, and we ended up moving to Washington State shortly after.
And you were like, okay.
But I never, it always made me a little nervous of janitors. I mean, and like just being alone with an adult, I just kind of was like, from that point on, like, I'm ready to flee, flee. Where's the escape route? I would pay attention after that.
And this is the thing, we teach kids to be careful with strangers, but, somebody that does janitorial work, you really don't see him as a stranger per se.
No.
He's usually in the background because he's got an excuse to be there because he's cleaning, So
he's a trusted person with lots of keys.
Well,
we told us, oh, girls, they moved the meeting down to here, to this room. Right. And then all of a sudden he's, locking us in there, and we realized this is just not good. And he's like, no, just stay. And I'm like, no. And I figured
thank God you guys had your wits about you and, self-preservation kicked in. But it's like, same thing, and for kids, you're thinking, okay, if the adults have given him a job, like you said, he's got the keys, so I guess he's okay. Huh? He's okay.
He told us he knows what's going on. Oh, okay, we forgot, we're kids.
Oh, my God, Tui, what a story.
So,
God.
Graveyards and me, we go back.
That is... incredible, and I'm glad it turned out with a happy ending for you guys. I really am.
Yes,
you were smart girls. You guys, that's it. We're out of here.
Yeah.
I wonder. You know what? I wonder. I'm doing the. I wonder if this guy left town. I wonder if they're gonna go home and tell their parents. Let me get the heck out of Dodge before.
I don't know. Because I know he had kind of a Swedish accent. I remember. This is one of those things. I mean, yeah. Yeah, he was really nice to us at first. And
of course.
Fine. And then all of a sudden we realized, look, he's trapped us here. And we just had this moment where we looked at each other and we realized we got to get out. I'm like, the window. And luckily he was, across the room enough that we could get that window pried up enough and climb out. I mean, it was just it could have gone such a different way.
That could have had a really bad ending. Unfortunately,
he was making a phone call to somebody too, so I don't know what was up. I mean, was he going to sell it? I mean, I look back and I'm like, God, that just could have been so bad. And I don't know
what? He could have been calling an accomplice. He could have been like what you said. Hey, oh, absolutely, yeah. That's what I'm saying. That could have been turned out to have a really horrible end.
Yeah.
So anyway, such a good story after the fact, but it's such a good story.
Yes, after the fact, and at the time it was just I don't know, whatever. But it did have a lasting impression. And my parents, we weren't allowed to play with each other anymore. Our parents were so mad at us.
Really?
For that, yes, it was kind of a weird thing. But so I don't know, whatever. I'd love to find her, track her down, and find out if she, we split town, a few weeks later.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like.
Right, no, when you're a kid, you got no choice. Your family moves out of town. What are you going to do? You got to go. And like you said, it's not like now you got social media and other ways that you can communicate with a person. That's it. Once you're out of town, you lose touch with everybody. especially if you're a
And,
child.
yeah, and it's just like, okay, new chapter, new beginning. I'm moving to Washington State. It's kind of different from Virginia, that's for sure. But yeah, so that was one. I just always, to me, I think graveyards and cemeteries are just refuges. And I think a thing that I really want people to get from my book and to understand, or one thing that I'm out to promote, is that we mistakenly, and it's because of Hollywood and our idea of what a cemetery is and what it's become. Now, what it's become in modern days, it's just become a place where you take a dead person, you tuck them in the ground, or you toss their ashes, and then you go. You don't go back. But they used to be, like in the 1800s, and even going back to Greek times, it's a time-honored tradition to have a picnic in the cemetery.
Right, they were like parks, right?
Yes, they were. They were garden cemeteries of America and Europe. They were meant to be places you would go. They were actually America's first first public parks. They didn't have public parks in cities. What they had were, I should tell you, there's a difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. A graveyard, if you want to be technical, I use the words interchangeably, but if you wanted, you were on Jeopardy or something, you had to know the difference. A graveyard is when people are buried around a church. Okay. And that was what that's how it kind of began. Unless you were living out in the countryside, but if you lived in the city, especially, and in the country, you'd be buried around a church. So that's a graveyard. A cemetery, it comes from a Greek word. I think it's koimetrion, which means a place to sleep, like a sleeping chamber. Okay. And that came along with the Victorian era because they like the whole euphemism of sleep for death. And cemeteries are land that's just been put aside to bury people, not necessarily attached to a church. Okay. So what happened by the 1800s, if you start burying people around the little churchyard, you've only got so much room until you start burying them on top of each other. And there's coveted spaces. Especially some of these traditions came across the pond with us when the European settlers came to America. But there would be the north side of the church might have been for like suicides and the bad people, quote unquote, less unholy people. There was like a pecking order. The east side of the church, because you wanted to face east on Judgment Day, might be a more coveted spot. Wow. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, or behind myself, or whatever. I'm getting off the topic. Well, no,
but you know what? That's interesting because that's stuff that people don't realize that people cared about, I guess, back then.
Yeah, they really did. Oh, it's really fascinating. So at one point in the 1800s, it started to happen that these graveyards were so overcrowded that, let's say there was a big flood or a big storm, or just the wall would weaken, the church wall would weaken and collapse, spilling corpses into the streets. Yeah, and even then, although they didn't understand germs to the degree we do, they knew this was a health hazard. Plus, it's horrifying to see. Did not smell good or look good or yuck. So what are we going to do? Well, in America, we looked to see what they were doing in Europe because they were having the same problem in Europe. In Europe, like in Paris, there are these huge catacombs where all these bodies, that they just kind of turned into skeletons and stacked neatly down below the street because they were running out of room in the city area. So some person had a very smart idea. Let's make a cemetery outside of the city limits where it'll be a nice, like a sculpture park where people can go and visit. And so now that's why they created Père Lachaise, which is really still to this day a top tourist destination. I haven't been. I need to go to Père Lachaise. But lots of famous people are buried there. Oscar Wilde and Jim Morrison, and it's just gorgeous. Every photo I've ever seen of it, there's really opulent statues. So what they did in Massachusetts, they did the same thing. The people of Boston, they thought, we're having this overcrowding in the city. Let's make a cemetery, a garden cemetery. So they created Mount Auburn Garden Cemetery. I think it was 1831, right around there. And it became a very popular destination for city dwellers. Let's go out for the weekend. They would have carriage races. They would even shoot game. Kids could run around. Artists would set up their easels. Ladies could stroll. And you had this beautiful monuments, cemetery monuments. And during the Victorian era, really gorgeous monuments kind of became the thing. And I think you and I were talking about before this interview started, this was really the heyday for cemetery symbols, was during the Victorian era. So you see these really glorious symbols. So that was just, so when people, my thought, so we still have these. America has a lot of garden cemeteries, and then places that don't have the fancy garden cemeteries. There's beautiful rural cemeteries all throughout Texas. We have a lot of gorgeous rural ones. These ones are a little different. They usually have, even today, some of them still have a homecoming day or a decoration day,
right,
where you will come and clean up.
Yes, I know. I've seen.
Go to this cemetery. Isn't that neat? And off in the corner, you might see a barbecue. Barbecue is such a big thing. I've been in cemeteries up in Texas. I love it. I'll see a barbecue. I always go and lift the lid, and I'm like, yeah, they've been using this thing, you know?
Yeah.
Because they're
back then, it wasn't what people think of as being morbid. It was like you said, you're going to spend a day, and it's a beautiful park, and then people just happen to be buried there.
Well, people forget. So now we have forgotten. This is what we've forgotten. Cemeteries are for the living. Hello? Mm-hmm. Yes, you put your dead there, but a cemetery is for the living. It's for us. It's for us humans. But what's cool, it's also now, because of some of these older places, like if they've been around since 1830 or before, they have heritage plants and bulbs. So people are into old antique roses and things you won't find in a catalog now. So a lot of these garden cemeteries, they have got arboretum status now, because they are like a living library. You can go through there and see plants and animals that it provides a great, when I was younger, I used to think, oh, what a waste of land, a cemetery. When I went
of course.
I started to think that. And then now I don't think, at 18, you think a lot of, things. That's one of my thoughts I remember having at one point. Now I think, what a great use of land, cemeteries. Yeah. They keep ugly buildings. If you want to see, take some photos without a bunch of power lines in your way.
Yes.
If you want to see, in Texas, people always love to go out in the springtime and take pictures sitting around the bluebonnets, but they do it on the side of the highway, and it's not very nice. You go to a historic cemetery, sit amongst the bluebonnets there, and it's just so much nicer. So that was a big impetus for me to write this book, was just to kind of reestablish the fact that it's a time-honored tradition to enjoy a cemetery, and that they are for the living, and there's nothing wrong about going there. It's almost taboo for people. They just bury someone. You're sad to get it, but you don't have to be mourning to go there. You don't have to be sad to go to a cemetery.
Exactly.
It can be and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but
and it's like what we were talking about. When I go into cemetery now, especially if it's still open and it's accepting like burials, you know where the older part is because the monuments change.
Yeah.
Okay, and the newer part, you've got either flat ones or maybe some that are maybe 3 feet tall, a little bit. Once you look in the older is when you start seeing the big monuments, the mausoleums, the family mausoleums. You can tell right away where the older part of the cemetery's at.
And generally it's from after, you can tell when the Great Depression was. So kind of from the 1930s and before, because during the Great Depression, people had to travel far away to find work. So before that, people in America were more likely to live in their central family groups, and you're born in Virginia, you die in Virginia, you have your family plot, you know exactly where you're going to be. And that little family plot, which you'll see in those historic ones, and you see the line around it, well, that's also to let you know exactly what part of the ground you need to tend. So you take care of that, you plant all your plants there, you do whatever you want there, and then, the next family over knows exactly where they can go. But after people were moving away to find work, and there was no one to come back and tend their family plots, they had to turn to perpetual care. And and then also lawn grasses were developed, the lawnmower came along, and things like that. And so they thought, let's just plant them in grass and make it easy so that we can hire someone just to mow over it, and that'll be perpetual care. So it's, that shift. There still are some cool cemeteries, newer ones that still have nice monuments going up and allow people to more freedom, because a lot of them, they just don't, people say, well, why don't people put up interesting monuments anymore? And they just have those flat ones that maybe aren't as interesting. Well, it's because the rules say, it's like a homeowners association, no, you can't have that. But certain burial areas, burial grounds will allow that. And those are the ones that I love. And I think, they're most interesting. And that's why, I got that whole book of symbols. It's fun to figure out what those truly are messages from the dead. What were they trying to see? What were they trying to tell you? And the more I learn about them, the more when I go through a historic cemetery, the more I see. Like a cemetery that I used to think, oh, there's not a lot to see in this cemetery. Now, the more I learn about symbols, I go through and, oh, hey, they've got this going on. They've got that going on. It brings it to life.
Well, and this is the thing, because let's face it, you have only X amount of space sometimes to put whatever it was that you wanted to say about this person, especially if they were well loved for whatever reason.
Yes.
So yeah, it was sometimes it was easier, I imagine, to do it with a symbol versus writing out this
Well,
paragraph.
that's the beauty of a symbol. They are, the old cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words. But the thing is, you mentioned people choosing, that's more a modern take. Like nowadays, I die, and then my friends trying to decide what symbols to put on. But 100 years ago, and so when I read about people, our ancestors, they were planning their own epitaphs, and they took this quite seriously. So they would be doing this in their 20s and 30s. And so if I were a wealthy blacksmith and I started to make some money, I'd be thinking, I think I ought to make a nice family monument. What do you think, to my wife or my husband,
Right.
And then the family would plan it together. And so I'd read that, their monument was completed, 12 years before anyone actually passed away. But they would, so they even had a catalog for one of my favorite kind of monuments they're called white bronze.
Okay.
But they're all, they did that because it made it sound exciting. White bronze kind of made it sound classier. It's actually a zinc alloy. And they were put out by the Connecticut, the Connecticut Monument Company, Bridgeport, Connecticut Monument Company. And you'll see like an obelisk sometimes.
Okay.
And it'll have panels around the side. And people would pick these out of a catalog and order them.
Okay.
And they've held up really well over time. They're beautiful, gorgeous monuments. And those are some of my favorites.
Right, because on some of those obelisks, it's exactly like on one side you'll have the memorial for one family member. And then as you go around it, at the base, it has a memorial for different members, like...
Yeah.
And this is like that family memorial per se.
And if you tap on it, it's metal. It's probably white bronze. And you'll probably see on there, sometimes you'll see a little thing that says Bridgeport, Connecticut Monumental Bronze Company on it. Yeah, you got it. And tap on it, and they'll sound hollow. And they're very well... they went out of business after World War I because the war effort needed the zinc for armament.
There you go. The war got in the way.
But up until then, it was really, they have really held up nicely.
I think stuff, and I mean, lately I've gone to some cemeteries where people, because nowadays some of these memorials are really expensive, and I've seen where families have made their own version of a memorial. Like I went to one cemetery up in Central Florida. It's a smaller rural cemetery, and they had put the guy's saddle there as part of his. It was great. They did it really nice. And it was like
personality.
Right, yeah, it's more personalized, and I could see it. You know what? This speaks more than some of these.
It tells you a lot. I know I saw one that had a barrel on it because the person was a barrel rider. And I'm like, what? And then you go up, and then I saw there was a lasso and other stuff, and I realized, a championship rider. It was kind of cool.
Yes, people are taking it their own personal touch. I think between personalization and cost less, that's why they're going. But you mentioned something earlier, Tui, which is. Because that you said look for certain graves sometimes that are different, because we were talking about sometimes when people, if they were objectionable, whether because of who they were or what they did, they kind of like, if you were allowed to be buried in the cemetery, they kind of like put you off or somehow made you look like that there's something wrong with that person. And you were saying something about even the way if certain graves are facing all in one direction, but you have one that's not.
Yeah. Keep an eye out. That's one thing to sort of, when you're walking, just something else to keep in mind when you're walking through a historic graveyard or cemetery. Pay attention to what direction the headstones are facing. So if there seems, it really varies. There's cultural reasons, and there are a lot of times, this is not, I like to say just because it's written in stone doesn't mean it's written in stone. I mean, you have to take a lot of these things with a grain of salt. I wrote like what different symbols mean, but I tell people to pay attention to the context. Because the same symbol can mean something different. Are you in a Jewish cemetery? Are you in a Christian cemetery? Right. A good example of that is a pitcher. So you see, not like a picture, but like a pitcher you'd pour water. If you're in a Jewish cemetery and someone's headstone has a pitcher on it, that means they descended from the tribe of Levi. Because the Levites washed the priest's hands with water.
Wow,
but if you're in a Christian cemetery and you see a pitcher, that's a really fun one. That's someone you probably want to look up because they put that on the grave of a really righteous woman. So a woman who was very,
Okay, that's interesting.
In fact, she might have checked her dates on her. She might have even been involved in the Prohibition movement. Like she might have been a teetotaler.
Yes. Wow, teetotaler.
Yes. Maybe she was an axe wielding, Carrie Nation follower.
Yeah.
And that's someone. Like, if you see that, it'll say something. Usually, the epitaph on there will be too, like she gave her life for others and was really, like, whoa, this person was, practically a martyr.
Interesting.
So just pay attention to where you are. When I say that, like, pay attention to where you are culturally and the time.
Yeah, because
like what did she live during Prohibition? So there's so many clues, so many layers. Oh, I'm in the Christian section. Oh, she died during, in the 40s, so she was alive during Prohibition. She, this or that. It was a female. You kind of can. It's fun to puzzle it all together and see what you can find. But yes, so then, like, pay attention to see how, everybody's headstones, they seem to be facing east because they want to be facing east on Judgment Day. Now, sometimes one will be facing the other way, west, and that might, sometimes, I have seen this, that can be that it's a minister, and he wants to be facing his flock. So, Judgment Day comes, he wants to leave all his, so it's not really that there isn't like he did something bad, but the thing to look for, though, but that's still an interesting story. So if everybody's facing this way, and then one's facing a different way from everybody, or they're just off in an unkempt area, that one too is like, okay, what happened there? Is that a potter's field? But if they got enough to have a monument, what's the deal? Are they? Sometimes that's the criminal. Sometimes that is someone who was ostracized in life for some reason. Everyone thought they were a witch. There's might be some interesting story behind them, sad story perhaps, or just why were they? Because even in death, we do kind of, people can be very cliquish, I guess, for like a better word, So those are ones, when you're walking around an old cemetery trying to figure out which one you want to research more, those probably have stories behind them.
Right, it was like the good Christian folks said, we'll bury this person, but we're not happy about it.
Well, yeah, in fact, they would even go so far as, I know at least in Europe, around in the graveyard, if you committed suicide or were some other, had some other blight on your character, in their opinion, rather than bring you through the graveyard gates, they would pass your body over the north side of the graveyard fence.
Really?
As a way to express, there are a lot of ways to express that you were just less than kosher in their opinion, or less than, I don't know, you were not of upstanding character in their mind.
Right.
So
and that's what we were talking about, that people don't realize that back then, people really cared about that. It was like disapproval even after you're dead.
What people really cared about, too, that always surprises people. I love, because I give talks, and I love giving talks about cemetery symbols, and one thing that will bring gasps from the audience sometimes, or a couple of them will, two things, actually, pretty much. Let's say you or I were vacationing in some town, and we died. Okay. And they just found us there on the street. We just dropped dead on the street. Back then, you didn't really have ID a lot of times. And not like we do now. So if you did kinfolk, no one knew who you were, they would just set you in a chair usually in the window of the furniture store, and leave you there in a chair, your dead body, and hope someone would recognize you as you passed by.
My God. That's incredible. Jeez.
I know. But I've read about that enough now that I'm kind of like, oh, okay. But I love, so I forget because I do a lot of research, and then I mention that to a crowd, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. I remember I was pretty freaked out when I heard that, too.
I know, because you think, God, that what? But you know what? I know there's also practical.
Better or worse, I don't know.
I mean, because if you're thinking, because, you always think of that, like, you look at the Westerns, when they would kill the criminals, and they would put them in the pine boxes out in front of the saloon, so, hey, we killed them, watch. But I had never heard of that. But I know there's always a practical aspect to it. And I think some of the times is, besides the fact that they want somebody to come in so that the townspeople don't have to bury this unknown person, because it costs money.
Well, and sometimes I would read about that. Okay, so a lot of times it was a furniture store, because a lot of times the furniture store was also the place that made coffins. If you didn't make your own, a lot of people made their own coffins.
Right.
And then they'd set them in the corner and use them as bookshelves. I mean, this is just a normal person. This isn't nowadays. If you're some person with a coffin in the bookshelf, you're probably kind of goth.
Right,
or
right.
You've got skulls.
But that was
it's part of your decor. It's a statement. Back then, it's just like, yeah, Grandpa made that. He's using it for his books until his time comes. It's like, not. There were different attitudes they had.
No, you have to be practical about things. It's like,
you
forget
really
the morbidity. I mean, you were. oh God, what was it the other day? I can't remember. What town was it, Marlene? I can't remember, but it was where it was a smaller town where the furniture company used to double as where they would do the wakes. Almost like
sure. See, the furniture people.
I was like, what? I looked at that and I said, is this a typo? And it's like, no, they actually, it was like, this is where you would do the wake at the furniture company. And I was like, what? Okay.
Yeah. Because they're already making furniture, and it's just sort of like furniture you're going to put in the ground, so it's a little sideline for them, and they got to branch out.
Yeah.
And, coffins weren't mass-produced until after the Civil War, because that's when we really, really needed it, and people were dying and needing to be transported all over America. So, before that, it's just like, I'll make you a chair, I'll make you a coffin, I'll make you whatever.
Right. I think it was a funeral. It was an obit or something like that. I was reading it, and I was like, what? In the furniture company? I was like, what is that?
Little things, it kind of makes me sometimes want to make a TV show of old-timey, those little historical tidbits to just stick into a TV show that kind of make us go, wow, that are eye-opening. And it hasn't only been like 100 years or so, or 120 years that would have been normal. I mean, wow, have things changed? Oh, here's the other thing that always kind of gets gasps from the audience is that we have a different idea now. Like when you die, on your on my card, on my driver's license, I'm an organ donor. So I figure if I go and there's anything usable, on me, they can have my usable. They can have my corneas or my whatever. Take it if you want it, take it. And then I haven't decided what to do after that. But I won't need my body, right? Well, back in like the 1800s and before that too, they really believed that on Judgment Day, I've seen cases where the person would have a fresh pressed suit, a change of clothes down at their feet. So on Judgment Day, they could change really quickly to their Sunday best.
It's like, okay. That's
incredible.
I've
seen this a few times too. Like,
incredible.
It gets better. People, if you had to have something amputated, like your arm or your leg or whatever, you would bury that next to you because on Judgment Day, you wanted all your parts. You get a buggy accident, you're not going to donate your body. That was a creepy idea to them. They wanted everything. And it was distressing it was distressing to them not to have all their parts on Judgment Day. So it's a different attitude towards, it's very literal about you needing your body. Of course you wouldn't be cremated. You want all your pieces.
From what I understand, this is why grave robbing back then, besides the obvious, was so horrendous to them, because if you're thinking, there's nothing of me left come Judgment Day. I've been taken apart.
There used to be riots in America at medical colleges.
Really?
Because there was no legal way for them to obtain cadavers to do studies on.
Right.
And so either the students or they would hire somebody, they would look for fresh corpses and, within a certain week window. And there was at least 17 different riots that I managed to find out about during the 1800s where people would go. One case really sad. I mean, this man, I just thought about it. For me, it would be so distressing. Okay, so, it's one thing to donate your body willingly. All right. Back then, no one wanted to because you think you need it. After you're dead. Okay, that's our cultural belief. But there's this conundrum because there's also this rise of medicine is trying to become a thing.
Right.
So, this man heard a rumor that he lived in Ohio. He heard a rumor that his daughter's body had been dug up, or it had been dug up, I do believe. So he's trying to track it down. They tracked it down to a medical college. So he and his buddies went to the college and just unannounced and somehow, charged through there. And he found his daughter's hand. I don't know.
Wow.
And I can't blame him for going bonkers. He and his buddies just set the place on fire. I mean, what are you going to do? They were so upset. So that is something that used to happen before we had a more standardized and a different, the cultural shift had to happen too. So the next thing was they would then use criminals' bodies. So that didn't make donating your body have a higher self-esteem. Not self-esteem, but seem like a good thing either. If only criminals and bodies were being used, it took a mental shift among people. But there were a lot of things too. There's some interesting patents out there, or you can search the internet for them. And I have in my book I talk about it a bit too. The exploding coffins, things that would.
Are you kidding? Like a booby trap coffin?
There's pretty cool ones. You can see these old time drawings, figure 1, figure 2, these really elaborate drawings. Another thing they used
What?
to do to avoid, the void, they called them the resurrectionists. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a
Yeah.
cool name. Yeah, so one way to avoid being dug up was they would put them in receiving vaults. So if you're in a this is something to keep in mind. So if you're in a historic graveyard or cemetery and you're wandering around and you see a really old storage shed, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of fancy, like maybe it's made of stone or brick, and it has maybe, it's just a little fancier than just a garden shed, and
Right.
it's fairly large, that may once have been a receiving vault. So sometimes what they would do is, number one, well, if you were living north and the ground freezes and you can't, the
Yes,
gravedigger
right. They
can't
can't
dig.
dig.
If it's permafrost, happening in the winter, they can't dig your grave. So they would have to store your body until the springtime and then dig. So that was one reason
Mm-hmm.
for the receiving vault. Another reason for the receiving vault, though, was to keep your body until it wouldn't be wanted by a gravedigger. That was sometimes a strategy. And some cemeteries would hire night watchmen.
Right.
Other cemeteries, of course, so they would then target where poorer people were buried. So like more
Right.
country cemeteries and things. So they would do things like alternate dirt with straw because it's harder to dig if you keep hitting straw. The theory
Okay.
was that would slow you down because if you're a grave robber who's going to steal, you got to be really fast
Right.
to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
so
like get in and out.
we'll try this one. Oh, okay, forget it. Let's go over to this one. So that was another. There were a lot of strategies. I really kind of got into wow, this could be a whole book on its own. Pretty much every chapter in my book, I felt like, wow, I think each of these, I've got so much research I couldn't stick in the book because I want it to be kind of concise, a good overview. But there's so many little sidewinding roads that I still, in the research, I could dig in, literally dig into more.
One of the things that I found, because I was doing also research, after the Civil War, which is when they put up a lot of the big asylums or sanitariums, the mental, poorhouses / whatever, that they would just.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
your husband's mad at you. He reads he declares you insane.
Whatever. I want to get rid of my wife, which, by the way, I ran across a couple of those stories. I'm going to say she's mentally ill and commit her and, and move on with my girlfriend to another state, whatever. They would donate, unfortunately, because many times the families just didn't care, had moved away, they would donate their bodies or give their bodies over to for the universities and things like that. Because, again, most of the time, nobody was there to claim the body. And once there was nobody there, basically, these asylums that were 9 times out of 10 run by the state had the option of doing whatever they wanted to with the remains.
And they can make a little money selling it to the college, and no one's going to come.
Exactly. The universities, of course, were the big ones because that's where all the medical students were attending. Refrigeration is not what it is now as far as to keep a corpse. So, a lot of the patients that ended up dying in a lot of these asylums, that's where they ended up at. They would be given over to the university for dissection and anatomy and again, no family there to say, what are you doing? So that was the end of that.
Yes. And sometimes I've come across ones where they were trying to defend the criminal. So the family spends all the money on lawyers and everything.
Yes.
And then when the person, dies in prison or it doesn't go well, they can't claim the body. So
no, and then back then, people don't realize that sometimes even if you were really, really poor, even a simple casket or transporting it was beyond your means. So you really didn't have much choice, and that as a matter of fact, that's where a lot of times you would end up with those paupers' graves in some of the cemeteries. Even if we're not talking, especially if you had somebody die out there where there was no family or the family didn't show up or couldn't have the body shipped back to them. It was like, okay, we need to bury this person. Okay, just put them over there in the corner. So
I know, there are also African American slave graveyards. They are constantly. I post a lot of this. I have a Facebook page where if anyone who's watching this wants to post things, interesting graves they've seen, or I post articles. I posted a few recently about just different African American slave cemeteries that have been accidentally discovered. Recently, even, and they. Now they're trying to preserve them and figure out who's there, and it's really a labor of love for some historians. They've managed to trace some things back.
Yes, or they're doing some type of what was it in? I want to say it's about this came out like less than a year ago. It's got
Oh.
University of Mississippi on their medical campus. Same thing. They were doing some type of because back then they would even segregate sometimes the insane asylums, and they were digging up
Wow.
some type of the some ground for something. They were going to build something, do something, and they discovered not hundreds, thousands of graves.
Oh, wow.
Of
Yeah.
these people that were African American that had been in this asylum and had died. And back then, they weren't going to put up any memorials or anything like that. And as time goes by, and they repurpose the buildings for other things, everybody forgets that field out there is littered with bodies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you're saying, every once in a while they're doing a road or they do something, they start coming up with all these surprise, all these different...
Yeah, and some of it, I mean, they're pretty urban areas occasionally. I think I just saw an article the other day about a place in Brooklyn. You would think they would have found everything in such a population, such a dense population, but they finding finding cemeteries there.
Most of the times I've run across sometimes the stories, and it's almost like what you said, like the Poltergeist. You know how the Poltergeist movie?
Yeah.
They were supposed to move the bodies, but they never did. It's the same thing. When they start digging up and they come across what they realize is a cemetery or graveyard, when they go back in the records, they say, oh, yeah, 100 years ago, supposedly they moved...
And it was almost a cliche, a horror story.
Yeah, they moved
moved
the bodies to this new cemetery, but let's face it, these businessmen were thinking, that's a lot of money. Take a few of them and forget it. Don't worry, it doesn't matter.
I just read an interesting book kind of along those lines. It's called Digging for Daddy, and it's about this woman. She just tried to fulfill a simple, not such a simple quest, but her mom's dying wish was that she lived, and her family now live in Texas, but the father was buried up in Chicago, and they wanted to get his body transported to Texas and just have everybody all buried in a family plot down there.
Okay.
It's easy. They went up. She had attended her father's, he died when she was young, but not that young. I think she was a teenager. I mean, it wasn't like she was so little she couldn't remember anything. And they were part of a church. And so she remembered even who had attended the funeral. Okay. And she knew what her dad's headstone looked like, where it was. But it'd been a while since she'd been there. She travels up, gets permission to exhume his body. Number one, they had to dig the body. They had to do the digging themselves, like with shovels. They were not allowed to take a backhoe on there because it would have been, they thought that was too destructive for so that was a big eye-opener. So she and her family literally digging it up. They bring it up, and long story short, it is the wrong grave. So they try a whole bunch of, I forget how many graves they dig up, 9 or 10, and they do DNA testing, and nobody's buried where they're supposed to be. And every time she arrives, the clergy members they're conveniently out of town.
What?
Yes. Oh. So I'm on an interview, Dad, so I can't talk right now. Larry's in the other room. Sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry about that.
It happens.
Believe me, I know.
A lot of usually I make little signs, and I don't. I'm since I'm down here for the winter, I have all sorts of signs at home that say I'm on air right now or this or that.
Don't worry. I've got animals. I've got birds. So every once in a while I'll be doing a show, and my dogs will bark or my birds will go so don't worry about that.
I'm surprised my cat's just staying asleep the whole time we're doing this. Anyway, there's my father-in-law walking around behind us.
Don't worry.
You're on air, Dad. Anyway,
not to worry.
It was quite a interesting book. If anyone wants to read it, Digging for Daddy. And
so, in other words, what they thought was going to be a simple "let's bring Daddy home" turned out to be. That's incredible. Because
yes,
it makes you wonder, what did they do?
It kind of looks like there's a similar thing. They were supposed to, they just, I think, moved the headstones and then moved the bodies and then resold the plots to other people over time. And so they started to do it correctly, and some bodies were found, but then they just slacked off, and who knows, and they didn't keep good records. And it's just a big, it's a really horrifying tale. I just kind of read it one afternoon. I couldn't stop.
Let me tell you something. I'm going to look that up. I'm going to look that up because, let me tell you something. That just happens to be more common, I think, than people realize. It's just that people never go back and find themselves wanting or having to do that.
You might want to interview her. She's a really interesting lady. Yes. I haven't met her in person, but
God,
She's really,
that's like something I bet you when they started that, it was like, it takes you off in a direction you never expect.
And
then,
plus, they went through huge personal, emotional, duress and personal expense to go up there and get this. Now, because of what they're doing and their tenacity, there is some legislation going through to protect this from happening again. It was not legislated. It was not overseen. It's something you would think people would be required to keep track of, but it just all fell through the cracks. No one was really keeping track of it, and they were able to, it happens more often than you think.
Well,
I guess,
that's what I was about to say. If you think that was an isolated incident, no.
Yeah, no.
Not at all.
That was my big eye-opener. That, and that they had to do all the digging themselves. Finally, they got some publicity, and a guy came with a backhoe and was able to help in certain areas, but there were still some areas where they had to physically just spend hours. And I just can't, how traumatic would that be? You digging up your own ancestor? I don't know. It would be tough.
Well, about a year ago in San Francisco, there was a family. They live in I want to say it's Richmond Heights. They're doing, they're renovating their garage, or they're doing something with their garage. And they decide they're going to go to Idaho, and the workmen, when they're digging, they find a grave underneath the house. Comes out, it's one of these small coffins. It was a child, and it had a window on it. When they look, they have perfectly preserved little blonde girl inside of it,
one of those.
holding a rose. So of course they come back, and the family gets a hold of the city, and the city's like, well, whatever, you do whatever you want.
I don't know.
They put her in touch with this organization which supposedly takes care of burying like unwanted children that don't have families.
Yeah.
But that, between the family and the organizations and everybody pitched in, they start trying to figure out, comes to find out, originally that whole area had been part of a cemetery. Same story.
Oh.
They had moved certain bodies, a certain map, I bet you the most economical way, so they left a bunch of these graves in there. And
no one will ever know.
Well, they did. They did find out, believe it or not. The university stepped in, and they opened it up real quick. It was airtight. That's why she was also so well preserved. They took like a hair follicle, and they were able to, for DNA purposes. And then they started looking at old maps of the cemetery that used to be there, trying to kind of like narrow down, because she looked to be like a toddler, like deaths and families. Bottom line, believe it or not, they were able to identify her like a year later, and they were able to find her family still living over there in California.
Really? I'm gonna look for that article.
Where because of the hair follicle, they were able to match the DNA, because they finally narrowed it down to certain families, and then they were able to find a living person of the family, luckily, and take a DNA swab and compare it, and that's how they confirmed this is who that little girl was. And it turned out it was her great-great or grand-nephew, he's an older gentleman now that still lived out in California. So they were able to do a DNA comparison. And when you see the picture, she looks like a little doll in this little lead coffin. And they had determined that she had died of something what they call miasmus, which is like that basically a child wastes away. They just, for some reason, they stop making it, their body stops taking in nutrients. And
failure to thrive.
She passed away. And, what they were saying was, obviously, this child was very well loved. Because of the way she was buried and everything, and she had a rosary made of eucalyptus seeds. I mean, everything was in there since it was airtight. She was perfectly in there.
That's really a historical record as well.
Yes, it is. It is.
I mean,
and
pretty, from the archaeological standpoint, and the historical and the cultural, and there's a lot to learn there.
And they said, well, also the family had to be pretty well off, because they were,
Yeah.
And luckily, the family member was still living in California, and they were able to match it up. And they did they reburied her, because they had given her, before they were, at some point they thought, we don't even know where we're going to find her. They had given her the name of Miranda Eve. And they had buried her, and then they did another ceremony, and they filled in her her gravestone
reinterred or somewhere.
yes, it was in a different cemetery. I think it's in Colma in California.
Oh yeah, I want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty amazing.
And I thought it was it was a really, really interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to what we were talking about, that a lot of times these graveyards or these cemeteries, because I'm glad you pointed out that difference for me. These cemeteries,
but like I use them interchangeably, but there's like a technical difference if you want to.
You know, these people that were doing back then, these businessmen, they were looking at budgets and expediency. They didn't care about sentimental stuff like that was your grandma, your grandpa, your kid. All they were thinking was, oh, okay, like take some over there and forget it. If they don't know about it, you know. And then the next thing you know is you're doing a renovation on your garage and you dig up a coffin. It's like, okay. So there you go.
Another person just walked in, so I was like,
don't worry about it. Well, you know what,
okay.
Tui, thank you so much for the time you spent for me. I could talk and talk hours and hours about this because I think it's so fascinating about the cemetery symbols. I enjoyed this so much, and I wanted to thank you for the time that you spent.
Yeah, I want to tell people if they want to get just a little brief guide to the meaning of hands in cemeteries, they can just go by my website, tuisnyder.com. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I don't send out that often. And as a thank you, you get a little PDF. And it's just a good way to get started. It tells you what different hands mean. Like, what does it mean pointing up? What does it mean pointing down? Yeah. You know, different types of handshakes. And just a little bit. I have a whole chapter on the hands, but this is just a little thing I like to give out when I give a talk as a preview.
I think that's great. I think it's fascinating.
People might enjoy it. And then the other thing I wanted to say, drop by my Facebook page. You can just type in Grave Hour as one word, and it'll pop up. And you can share, if you are watching this and you think, oh, I have a symbol, I'm wondering what it means. You can share it there, and me and the community there will help you figure it out. And it's just a fun place.
Excellent.
I like it, a place where I can go and talk about graveyards.
We'll be hooking
and
up.
Like you, I could talk about this all day, and I appreciate you having me on.
I love it. Thank you. No, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys. I'm such a dweeb. I am. I admit it. I'm such a dweeb. Because I think this stuff is so fascinating. To me, it is. It is. It's super fascinating because I feel like, I don't know if it's because I do so many visits to cemeteries. And you realize these are people, were people, I'm saying, sometimes with their own story. Some of them, inevitably we all die, but especially when you look at some of these graves where they were either young or children, it's very sad, or there's drama sometimes there, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's just ordinary lives that end up where we all end up at dying. But yeah, especially in the older parts, there's a lot of symbology that I'm going to get that book because there's a lot of stuff that I've seen that I was like, I wonder what that means. And I know it means something. So yeah, for any of those cemetery aficionados, even if you're not a ghost hunter, definitely her book is something to get. I know I'm getting it, like I said, because, even, and especially like she said about those graves that sometimes, depending on the reason, but sometimes that they face different ways or slant, or as a matter of fact, we were talking about it before we started to record, where back then, we're talking, maybe after the Civil War, turn of the century, a little bit, when you died, people even then they would object to being connected to you even after you died. They didn't want you buried in the same graveyard, or they wanted to shake their finger at you even from the other side, like either burying you in the corner, burying you in a different way. They wanted to castigate the person somehow or other. In other words, they wanted, and let's face it, nowadays, if you walk into a cemetery, you really don't know by looking at gravestones who was a good person, who was a bad person, who did good things, bad things, whatever. And back then, they didn't want you to be buried among the good people and for nobody to know that maybe you had done something wrong, whether it was morally wrong or whatever, questionable. It could have been the most simplest thing. They wanted, if anybody visited that cemetery, to know that somehow or other you had been a bad person, or you had did something that was not right. It was like that thing about the Christian symbolism of the picture for possibly a super straight arrow teetotaler woman. I gotta look at that. So guys, I hope you like the show. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel, catch me on Facebook and on Twitter. I stream a lot there. Again, I'm going to put out a call to my true believers. Guys, if you've got a story to say, film yourself and send it to me. Go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You'll find a connection there. Marlene at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You can do it with your phone. If you want to just record yourself into an MP3, tell a story. I get a lot of stories on emails. And I know I'm losing something in translation. And I promise I'll either include it, the recording, retell it, or just show your actual video of you telling me the story. If you want to omit full names, that's fine. However you want to tell the story. You don't have to have experienced it. If it's a family story, the families pass along generation to generation about the haunting at the old farm, I don't care. I'm not out to prove it. I just love hearing these stories about experiences that people have had, or their families have had, or locations. Even if it was something like what she was describing about when she was a kid, she hears something or somebody jumping on the bed. Hello. What is that? I think that was such a great story. And it's almost, how they look at the movies now, nobody believes the little kid. There you go. Nobody believes the little kid. And she was left to her own devices to confront it. But I think that was an excellent, I love that story. That's what I'm hoping some of you true believers are going to send me. Again, send it to me. I'm really interested in that. So guys, thank you so much for viewing this or listening on podcasts. Like I said, if you don't find me on YouTube, I'm on iTunes, I'm on Spreaker, I'm on iHeartRadio, I'm on SoundCloud. You can catch the podcast version of this, or you can even go to storiesofthesupernatural.info and you can either listen to the podcast or download it also from there. So either way, however it is that you access us, again, I want to say you have my deepest thanks, and please come back.